This is this between us.
The number one podcast in the world.
This is just between us with your host, Camo.
All right. How's it going, everybody? My name is Chris. This is Just Between Us. And I shouldn't say excited for today's show, but I am very ready for today's show. This is probably, I don't know, I've got to be getting close to the 100th podcast I've recorded. It's got to be somewhere in there, right? I really got to keep better track. You would think that I would want to celebrate that or something, but I still get nervous right before I hit the record button, and it's kind of silly because we pre-record these aren't live, but it's not because I'm nervous to get on and start talking or anything along those lines. It's almost that I can't wait to. And I've noticed that we have basically 3 different types of shows here. We have, news shows, basically just what's been going on lately. And we always try to cover, things that are kind of up to date, just because that's kind of what everybody does, and don't want to be too far behind the times and all of that. Although sometimes some of the second type of show that we have, the empirical shows, they take a while to come out. Been working on the Supreme Court cases recently and stuff. Those take a ton of research and just reading law in general, these court case decisions, and then all of the decisions that are relevant to them and all of that. Oh God, it takes forever. If I had the unlimited ability to print, it probably wouldn't be so bad, but I can just only stare at a screen for so long before my head starts killing me. But it's so... Legal writing is so convoluted, it is painful. But thankfully, today is my favorite type of show, which is the third type of show that we do, and that is rant shows. And I fucking love doing these because, my God, sometimes basically what happens is I do the other 2 types of shows until things just build up to the point on whatever the topic may be that I just can't take it anymore. Just can't take it anymore. And today I'm actually going to take us kind of all over the map. I've got a few different things. 2 of these are not so much news stories, but just recent happenings that kind of triggered this. Definitely this first one here that I'm going to start off with, but I am really excited to get into this and really get my thoughts out there about this. So, I don't think there's any other stuff that we have to cover. Anchor.fm/JBU, Facebook.com/JBU show, all that good stuff. Other than those Supreme Court shows coming out and stuff, I don't think there's anything else we need to talk about. No real changes or anything. Trying to go through my head right now. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So I'm just going to jump right into this here and start talking about this post from the Australian Capital Territory government. And I've got two things to rant about in this, but let's talk about what the post is first. First of all, you might be wondering what the Australian Capital Territory is, as I was. You can think of it sort of as Australia's Washington, D.C. It's basically their capital city and, some surrounding area there. And I want to be clear, before I get into reading this is something that, yes, it's in Australia, but I'm going to relate to the United States because this very easily could have been a post by Capitol Police or certainly Washington State Patrol in the state that I live, or just about, I could see it in California, just about any, at least liberal state in the country. And while I might be somewhat off base about the reality of this in Australia, although I doubt I am, this, what I'm going to say definitely applies here in America. And like I said, even though this post in particular is not from America, although I didn't go look to see if I could find one because I probably could. It just definitely applies. You'll see. So, mobile speed cameras. So in Australia, and this is common in Europe as well, they basically have these vans, just, like normal work vans with speed cameras in the back. And they drive them to wherever the hell they feel like and set them up. I don't know if any states in the U.S. have this. In my state, I've never seen any particular setups like this. However, of course, we have speed cameras set up, I believe because of the laws in my state, at least. I don't think there can be mobile ones. But there are physical, fixed location ones. And then there is, obviously, just cops that love to hang out and speed trap. There is I don't know, what is it? It's got to be like a 40-50 mile stretch of road, highway, that I used to drive every day, and they particularly love that road for many, many, many reasons. But there would be, just in that 50 mile stretch of road, there's one town at the end, and then a bigger town on the other end, and that's basically it. In between, it's mostly farmland in between, so there's very little places to turn off and all of that stuff. And it's not an extremely well-driven road, so it's 2 lanes on either side, completely divided in the center, and 60 miles an hour is the speed, but it's wide open, pretty much straight the whole way. There's, other than like tourist weekends, very little traffic, so you tend to speed on it. It's not a road that is conducive to wanting to go the speed limit, I guess. But we'll get into that more in a second. Anyway, so it says, mobile speed cameras play an important role in supporting road safety and the ACT government's vision. Excuse me, I almost choked on the bullshit here. The ACT government's Vision Zero strategy by reducing speeds on our roads. Across Canberra, which is the capital, there are 10 mobile speed vans operating on a roster to monitor 315 streets. These locations are listed on the ACT government's Open Data Portal Data Act. 10 speed vans. That doesn't include all the officers and possibly fixed locations. There are 10 mobile speed vans that they set up just for trapping speeders. And I'm sure, just like they do in America, they like to set up on things like the bottom of hills and blind corners. And the blind corners, that's one argument. But like the bottom of hills, sometimes even like you got your cruise control on, most cars will allow them to, on a hill, particularly a steep hill, it doesn't necessarily slow you down at all. So it's not until you start going up the other side that it slows back down to whatever you had the speed set to. It's a little thing, but it just feels like bullshit to me. But here's the thing. So ACT government's Vision Zero strategy, that is their carbon, zero carbon green initiative for the environment. So at least here in America, we've gone from the idea of police occasionally spending their downtime, going out and sitting on a road, watching for excessive speed violations and dangerous driving in order to protect the public, right, from those dangerous drivers. And really anything more than that, even Highway Patrol didn't spend all of their time just sitting on the road looking for people committing minor infractions. It was major infractions. And maybe this is a particular thing for me. I know some states are better. Surprisingly, California is actually one of the better states that I've lived in, that the Highway Patrol did focus more on major infractions, primarily because there was a more serious crime going on. They didn't really have time to do the other things. But at least where I was at, the California Highway Patrol did a pretty good job of not, harassing you every time you went by at 5 over the speed limit. That's not true in Washington State. Not at all. So we've gone from that general idea of the cop or the police officers, spending their occasional downtime out doing things of that nature, often setting up, not even necessarily specifically to pull people over, just to sort of, you see the cop, you slow down, you realize, hey, I probably shouldn't be doing that, right? So we went from that to specific dedicated police officers whose sole purpose is sitting on highways, generating revenue by ticketing for, minor infractions. I mean, it still started as more heavy infractions, but very quickly became much more minor infractions, right? Forgetting to use your signal one time when you change lanes, or not wearing a seatbelt, which will always drive me absolutely fucking insane, because absolutely nobody else is in any danger because I'm not wearing a seatbelt. And I do wear a seatbelt. I have always worn a seatbelt. But seatbelt laws drive me nuts. The fact that you can get ticketed for not wearing a seatbelt drives me nuts. Or even just pulled over in general. But, anywhere from that to, in my state, it's, you have technically you have a forgiveness of plus or minus 2.5 miles an hour. What that basically translates to is 5 miles an hour. And that doesn't matter if you're going 30 miles an hour or you're going 60. You can go, if you're going 30, they won't pull you over necessarily. Now, they still might if they want to just pull you over for some reason. But as long as you're going under 36, they won't pull you over. And at 65, as long as you're going under 66, they won't pull you over. I know some states, the general rule of thumb operates a little differently or whatever, but that's how it is where I live. But at the very least, even though we've now gone to dedicated officers that are, increasingly moving towards generating revenue, there is still a police officer there that is using some level of discretion. And, if you're going 10 over on an empty freeway at the middle of the night, no one's necessarily, you might get pulled over for it, but you're going to get a warning, right? So we went from that to further removing any sense of reasoning by a officer to using cameras to enforce ridiculous but easy to spot revenue generating offenses under the thinly veiled guise of safety. And a lot of people have had issue with this, but nonetheless, it's stuck around. And the reason I'm going through this real quick is just to show you, one, that the slippery slope argument is real, but two, really to tee up my argument here. But now it's gone to, we not only are using mobile stations that don't include an officer, but we're saving your very existence on Earth by pulling up every single tax dollar possible from you with cameras that watch your every move and ticket your every mistake. This is the mentality of government. This isn't just a marketing gimmick to make you take the ass whooping with a smile. They truly believe they are doing the public a favor by doing this. And if you believe so, please, JBU@USA.com. Email me. I will argue with you on the show, or we can just argue over email. I want to hear how you could support something like this. Please. Particularly seatbelts. But any of this, please. So, that's one thing. And that's, I would imagine most Americans, and hopefully most Australians, although there's such a beat down people that just nothing would shock me anymore after, the way the Australian government handle lockdowns and stuff. It really saddens me. But believe it or not, that is not actually my rant portion of this, as crazy as that is. So, while this is going on, which is, absolutely going on in the United States, like I said, I can only speak for my state specifically. I do also have, some pretty good knowledge of the surrounding states, just having traveled to them many times, living in some other ones. But it's going on for sure, and in my state specifically, it's absolutely insane. But while this is going on, while they are pulling people over, and again, they're primarily ticketing, extremely minor offenses that are, pose very little, if any, danger to other drivers, depending on what conditions they happen under, but are easy for them to spot, easy for them to generate revenue from. That is the point. These infractions come to them. They can sit in one spot and they can look for taillights out. They can sit in one spot and they can look for people going 6 miles an hour over the speed limit rather than 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. They can sit in one spot and check to see if drivers have seatbelts on and stuff. Meanwhile, according to AAA, somewhere between 1 in 3 and 1 in 2 adults admit to texting and driving, or reading a text while driving, or emailing, or whatever, some form of doing something on their phone while driving. And I don't have a problem with people talking on the phone while driving. Most states it's illegal to do so without a Bluetooth device or whatever. I think certainly for your own safety, with how cheap and common Bluetooth, or at least hands-free systems, most just come in cars now, it's kind of silly to talk on the phone. However, occasionally you didn't get a chance to get the Bluetooth hooked up or whatever, you get an important phone call, it just happens, right? And let's be honest, most of us are not going to ignore that phone call anyway. And being constantly paranoid, looking around to see if a cop's noticing you talking on the phone, is a hell of a lot more dangerous than just answering the call, paying attention to your driving, and finishing the call as quickly as possible. Texting, on the other hand, is an entirely different thing. And we've all seen, I know in my state, in my driving experience, and I have driven more in my recent life than most people generally do. According to the national average, people drive, 12,000 miles a year? I put like 100,000 miles on my car a year. It's probably not quite that much, but it's a lot of damn miles. I drive quite a bit. So I admit that, I see it more often than the average person, but I'm sure everybody has seen within the last 12 months, you have seen somebody driving erratically because they're fucking with their phone. I mean, at the least, when you're texting and driving, you're constantly slowing down while you're looking at your phone. And then when you realize, or you put your phone down, you might not even realize you did it. But when you put your phone down, you start speeding back up again. Drives me fucking nuts when I'm on the freeway. That's the least case scenario. Usually it'll end up swerving one direction or another, not noticing a car stopping in front of you, right? Whatever. It's damn near, if not as dangerous as drinking and driving. And if between 1 in 3 and 1 in 2 people are admitting to doing it, it's probably more like 70, 80, 90%. And why are cops exempted from that? I've never understood that. It's not any safer for them to do. Now, I understand in order to do their job, occasionally they need to run a license plate while they're driving on the laptop. I don't understand why there isn't standard hands-free devices for that shit now. You're telling me we can't get a system set up that they can say the license plate number out loud? That's ridiculous. You can't get a fucking Siri in there and say, hey, run this license plate. We could fix that problem ultimately without much issue, but it just doesn't it's not that I particularly have a problem with. I have a problem with everybody texting and driving because it even makes police drive like shit. But it's not that I have a problem with police, answering their phone or whatever. I understand they get important calls too. It's the idea that their calls are any more important than anybody else's. Nobody should have to deal with it rather than some. Anyway, back to the point. So you have, people texting and driving. You have people tailgating. Tailgating is incredibly common, right? People blocking the left lane on the freeway to where you get 10, 20, 30 cars lined up waiting to get by, which creates, a nearly unlimited amount of compounding hazards when you start getting a bunch of cars bunched closely together going 60 miles an hour. You have no room because there's cars on both sides, right? You can't change lanes real quick if you need to because there's an obstruction or somebody wrecks or whatever. There's just all sorts of dangers increased by one person blocking the left lane, forcing a bunch of cars to have to pile up behind them. Okay? It happens every day. Literally anytime I get on a freeway, I will run into it at least once, even if I'm only going one fucking exit. Guaranteed. People who literally take it upon themselves to block merging points because of some perceived injustice of people merging at the merge point. Quick side note, it's got that name for a reason. That's another argument. I know half of you are going to go, you should merge as soon as possible. I'm not saying don't merge earlier. I'm not saying that if the road is clear, you can't merge earlier. My point only is there's a merge point for a reason. And everybody fighting to get over early so they don't get blocked off at the merge point by some asshole just creates more slowdowns. Whereas everybody naturally merged when it was most convenient. And if that means at the merge point, then so be it. Everything's safer. Everything flows smoother. When you are that asshole that blocks the lane to not let somebody over because you feel some perceived injustice that they got fucking 6 feet in front of you, you are creating the hazard. You are the problem there. Not them, you. You can argue all day long that they should have gotten over earlier and the nice thing to do would have been to get over. That's fine. But they didn't endanger anybody's life by not doing that. You are now endangering people's life aside from slowing everybody down behind you until, the slowdown ends. Excuse me. But anyway, I'm getting off point again. This shit just drives me nuts. But one of the most dangerous things, though, is when you're on a 2-lane road and somebody has amassed a pile of cars behind them. Maybe they're even going the speed limit. It doesn't matter. In my state, a delay of 5 or more vehicles means you legally have to pull over. Not just if there's a turnoff. You need to take the next possible road or shoulder or whatever to pull over. And to accommodate that in places where it's typically a problem, especially because there's lots of hilly roads and stuff in Washington. There are lots of slow vehicle turnouts for that. But regardless of whether or not there's a slow vehicle turnout, if you were delaying 5 vehicles, you were supposed to get out of the way as quickly as humanly possible and allow those vehicles to proceed. Nobody ever does, right? Very few people do. And I have one time seen somebody get pulled over for it. And it was because there is a busy 2-lane road that runs on the coast here. It's a particular section. It's very, very busy for a 2-lane road for like this, 100-mile section. Maybe not quite that long, but it's a pretty big area. And this guy was in, an old shitty motorhome, and he was delaying what had to be 60, 70 vehicles. When we come onto a corner with long straights, I could barely see the motorhome up there. That guy I saw get pulled over. A cop came up from behind. Yeah, he must have been sitting in the line at some point, slowly worked his way up to the front, and pulled him over. And I hope to God slapped him with a big fucking ticket. Is it a huge deal that I was delayed probably 20 minutes? No. I mean, it's annoying and frustrating at the time, but it's not the end of the world. I can admit that. But again, by bunching a bunch of cars up together and on a road that is full of blind corners and all sorts of, when this is Western Washington. It rains a lot. When it's rainy and dark and cloudy, you can come around a corner, and if somebody is going half the fucking speed limit you're going, you can come around a corner and just run them right into them, even though they're moving 30 miles an hour. If you're going 60, it's incredibly common, aside from people turning off side roads, all that stuff. But again, though, bunching up a bunch of cars regardless is to put it better, it creates a bunch of compounding possibilities for accidents. And here's another thing that most people don't think about. It really can be a danger to people's life. If an ambulance gets into that line of cars at the back with their lights on and they need to get forward, it's not the type of road where people can pull out of the way for the ambulance frequently. They now have to take every possible passing opportunity to pass a couple cars at a time until they get up to the front, which is incredibly dangerous. As compared to if that person would have just pulled out of the way, traffic would have naturally spaced back out, and that ambulance would have had much, would have needed to pass far fewer cars, if any, because they would have had the opportunity to get out of the way. As well as just people trying to pass them in general at every opportunity possible. It's extremely dangerous to have to pass on a 2-lane road, particularly on the roads here in Washington, and I'm sure across the country, several others are very similar, where generally when you get a passing section on a back road like that or a back highway, it's pretty small. It's just enough to pass maybe one, maybe two cars, and then you're back to, road that's not conducive for it, which frequently leads in situations like that to people passing, they're pushing it to the corner or whatever. It's incredibly dangerous. Obviously, I know I've already drug it out pretty far, but obviously the list goes on and on and on, right, of dangerous driving conditions and habits and stuff that are far more worthy of police intervention and far more worthy of fines than somebody going 6 miles an hour over the speed limit, or somebody not wearing a seatbelt, or on the freeway somebody forgetting to signal even though there wasn't somebody there, or nobody close enough that it mattered, right? People love to get so angry when people don't signal, and don't get me wrong, you should use your blinker every time it's necessary. However, when you're signaling to go from the right lane to the left lane, and there may be people in front and behind you, but there's nobody in the left lane, or the person in the left lane is half a mile back or whatever, it makes no difference if you didn't signal. You weren't getting in front of anybody. It's only if you're going to be getting in front of somebody, or if you're going to be turning with somebody behind you or something, that it's important. This is one of those things where if people could just fucking use this stuff responsibly, we wouldn't have to have these conversations. But I've kind of drifted off to complaining about people's driving now, but the point, going back to it, is that targeting these actual driving dangers requires effort. It requires what we used to call patrolling. It means state patrol officers have to get on the freeway and drive their section of freeway back and forth all day long. It's really easy for somebody texting and driving to see that there's a cop ahead and put their phone down for the split second it takes them to go by them. It's really easy if you're speeding excessively to be focused in front of you, making sure that there's not a cop. And if you see one way up there, then you slow down and you're fine going by them. Generally, the people that end up speeding in front of a cop are the people going, 10 over. Maybe they got their cruise control set and they're just cruising. They're not they're not focused looking for cops because they're safely driving. Same goes for any number of other things, right? What's really hard to do is go 30 miles an hour over the speed limit and be watching in front of you so you don't wreck, and also watching your rearview mirror to see if cops coming up behind you. What's really hard to do is be focused on your phone, texting and driving, barely looking at the road in the first place, but looking at the road and then also looking at your rearview mirror to see if cops behind you. If they would spend their time driving, and I will make one other note here in just a second, but they would spend their time driving, looking for these actual serious infractions, I would never bitch about it again. But the fact is, all they do is find the lowest common denominator, the easiest to catch, meaningless infractions to generate revenue. And that is not police work. That is not moral. It's not right. It's just a tax that nobody voted for. And honestly, it's a little worse than that, but I'm going to leave it at that. I will say, I do have a little bit of sympathy for an officer not wanting to drive around all day, because I can only imagine how incredibly frustrating it is to drive as a police officer, because everybody slams on their brakes and gets behind you. Nobody will ever pass a fucking cop, and it drives me nuts. Most cops I see drive like 5 miles an hour under the speed limit just for the sake of not having to deal with that. And even still, they have to deal with it. If he's going 5 under and I'm going the speed limit, I'm not going to slam on my brakes and get behind him. I'm just going to drive past him because that's what you're supposed to do. It's pretty simple. But, I mean, I swear to God, every time, people who aren't even speeding, they will slam on their brakes. And that's part of the problem, too, with just sitting on the side of the road, is you end up creating a hazard. Quite often when I see cops pull people over for the dumbest shit, they are creating the biggest hazard. And they'll tell you themselves, them sitting on the side of the road is one of the most dangerous things they could possibly do. So why would you do it for somebody not wearing their fucking seatbelt? This shit has to stop if we're going to start coming to a better place in our country. Which, believe it or not, is where we're going with this fucking podcast, despite the fact I've spent 30 minutes bitching about traffic tickets. Okay. One more thing before we move on. Going back to the common sense thing. We need to change how speed limits work, okay? This is my argument for this. Speed limits are important, okay? I'm not saying they're not. I'm not about to argue that we don't need speed limits or speed limits aren't important or whatever, right? Speed limits are important, particularly in dense areas, right? School zones. I have no problem with 20-mile-an-hour school zones. I have no problem with, unregulated back streets, meaning no stop signs or whatever, being 25, because honestly, those scare the shit out of me. Once you've been hit in an uncontrolled intersection like that by somebody you did not see coming that just flew through it, you will never be able to drive through another one without, some form of PTSD. It just, all I see every time I'm going through an uncontrolled intersection, I have to stop and look, because all I see is a car flying through there and hitting me, which has happened before. Which is weird, because I'm not particularly a person that, that dwells on stuff like that, or what, I'm definitely not the type of person to say I was traumatized by getting hit by a car, and I don't mean to mock, it certainly can be traumatizing to be hit by a car. That's not what I mean, but it's just, it changes the way you drive once you've been in any accident to begin with. You realize how little control you actually had over that particular situation. There are so many things that you think. I used to tailgate people, right? I used to weave in and out of traffic to some degree because I was a teenage boy, right? It's just what we did do. But, I used to, I didn't tailgate in the sense where I was right on people's bumper, right? But I followed way closer than necessary, which, interestingly enough, the more room you leave between the car in front of you, the faster you get to go. I know that doesn't make sense in your head, but it does. Just try it. I promise. Leave a nice gap and you won't have to hit your brakes nearly as often. But anyway, sure, it's really easy 99% of the time. They hit their brakes, you hit your brakes. However, that 1%, there's going to eventually come a time where they hit their brakes so fast you cannot physically react that fast. And that's when it's going to matter. When somebody's hitting their brakes and they're only slowing down a couple miles an hour, you have a lot more forgiveness there. When somebody slams on their brakes because they weren't paying attention or were following the car in front of them too close or whatever, it's not going to happen. And God forbid you got a bigger vehicle than them that's not going to slow down as fast anyway. The point being, I'm not saying that speed limits need to go away. That's not what I'm saying. However, we need to change the way we look at things like speed limits. In the city, it is what it is. In, certain roads, like back roads is another place, right? The roads I've been talking about here in Washington. The speed limit is really important because there are going to be some corners that come up that if you're going a mile an hour over that speed limit, you're not going to make that corner no matter what kind of car you're driving. It's just the speed. It's just how it is. Sure, there's plenty of places on that road where you can go faster, but for certain going this speed, I will at least somehow make it through that corner. So there are, all sorts of different importances. However, we do need to talk about the fact that most of these speed limits were made either around the idea of revenue generation or decades and decades and decades ago, right? Most freeways and stuff, the speed limit changed a little bit after the 70s when the national, which I guess was decades and decades ago, but when the national speed limit was 55 for a long time, and then they finally got rid of that, so then states kind of set their new speed limits. In mine, annoyingly, it's 60 miles an hour. Some states it's 70. There are a few places in my state, very few, but there are a couple sections of highway where it's 70 for cars. But I know some places have them as high as 80 in, rural areas and all that. But this idea of 5 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, for one, needs to go. We need to treat it more like the Autobahn, where people need to put more emphasis on learning how to correctly use lanes and appropriate following distances. I don't give a shit if I'm on the highway and somebody is going 25 miles an hour over the speed limit, which in Washington State would be reckless driving. And if you're talking about a 30 mile an hour road, yeah, that might be reckless driving. But if we're talking about a freeway here or a highway, 25 miles an hour over 60 is what, 85? That's fast, but it's not ridiculous. I don't care if that person goes blowing by me, so long as I'm in the right lane, they're in the left lane, whatever. Their following distances are adequate, they're not driving erratically, they're not looking at their phone, all of that stuff, right? The emphasis needs to be on driving correctly and safely, not on the specific speed. If you want to say, okay, 15 over, 20 over is the maximum, fine, whatever. But there needs to be a little more give there, because most of these speed limits, like I said, were set decades and decades and decades ago, when cars now they literally have computers that anticipate things we couldn't before. They have auto braking, right? They can stop, in a quarter of the distance that a car even from the 80s or 90s could. And they have high-speed maneuverability that we could only dream of back then. In even fucking, minivans and shit. I'm not just talking about sports cars. There used to be, if you grew up poor like I did, and you had to drive an old-ass beater for your first car, you used to flip down the visor in SUVs and some pickup trucks, but mostly SUVs. You would flip down the visor, and there was a big-ass warning that said, this is not a fucking car. don't drive it like a car. Basically. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing. But I just think that makes far more sense. And that will help with this issue of writing tickets when somebody is going 6 miles an hour over the speed limit. I got pulled over one time going 70 in a 60 at 2 a.m. in the morning. The cop, and this was that 40-mile stretch road I was talking about. It's 2 lanes on either side. So I had 2 lanes of traffic going my direction. The highway was completely divided. There's like a big grassy area in between, and then a fence. And regardless, I mean, there's nothing on either side of the road. There's not houses or anything. Like, if I ran off the road, I would have probably been completely fine because it probably would have just run into grass. But if I would have hit something, it wouldn't have been a house. It wouldn't have been another person. There's no sidewalk. There's no, nothing. The only other person I saw on that road from the time that I started on it to the end of it was that cop. I got a ticket for $200 and some for going 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. That's just fucking ridiculous. Nothing else. I was doing nothing else wrong at all. Absolutely ridiculous. And honestly, police officers should be the first ones arguing for this. I'm not trying to put you guys out of jobs, although I think that while we definitely need more police, I think we could probably do with less state patrol, at least for the argument, or at least for sitting around, writing these bullshit tickets. There's other jobs we can put you to. You can patrol instead, whatever. I'm not trying to put you out of work. Public opinion's pretty shitty on cops right now, though. This is a really good way to try and improve that image. If you don't want to be treated like fucking tyrants, don't encourage acting like them. Because whether or not you're a good person, and you probably are, when you pull someone over to give them a couple $100 ticket for going 1 mile an hour faster than the person you let go, that's tyrant shit. And I understand tyrant's probably not the exact right word, but you get my point. I just find myself, I don't find any other way to describe that. I generally support police officers. I support what the police do. I am very forgiving of police that make bad decisions in split-second moments. However, this is a scenario, State Patrol specifically, and the way State Patrol operates, talking about traffic, not talking about responding to a call, which is not really State Patrol's job anyway. They do, but it's not really what they do normally. You honestly are responsible for 50+% of the bad images cops get, because everybody's dealt with a dickhead State Patrol agent. And I understand you're a dickhead because people are usually dicks to you, but people are dicks to you because you're doing something that's complete bullshit, and you can fucking puff your chest and say that you're, this is all about road safety and whatever, but that's horseshit and you know it. How often do you actually pull a drunk driver over? And, some State Patrol officer might say, well, at least twice a week, 3 times a week, right? Maybe a really good one once a day. How many other tickets did you write that week, though? Let's say you pull one over twice a week. Did you write 100 tickets that week? That's 2%. Yeah, occasionally something else falls into your lap, but there are far better ways to target these actual dangerous things. Jesus, did I just rant about that for 44 minutes? Well, naturally, as always, we definitely won't get to everything I wanted to get to today. I might just record all of it today, though, because I'm really feeling it right now. But I realized real quick, I don't want to get back into it since I just apparently spent 44 minutes, but I realized that at the end of that, I was going pretty hard at the officers doing these things. And honestly, it's well deserved. And I want to make sure, though, that I'm clear that, and I know you don't know me personally. Some police officers do. But obviously the vast majority listening to this probably don't. That, I know you get that plenty. However, in this case, this is coming from, I would say a peer, but I'm not a cop. I'm not claiming to be a cop. But it's coming from a friendly, right? As somebody who overwhelmingly supports police, even in bad decisions, because I understand what's asked of an officer in a bad situation, I feel like it's, it's your responsibility and my responsibility to call it out, even more so, the fucked up things that are going on and that certain officers are doing. Here's the thing. I guess I do got to go into this a little bit farther. I have virtually no respect for any Washington State Patrol officers still on the road. And I know that is a broad statement. And I don't know them personally. And I'm sure most of them are probably pretty good people. But my respect is gone. It doesn't mean that, I'm going to be a dick when they pull me over, or that I'm, that I'm not going to be a decent person, because that's who I am, right? But man to man, and I don't care if you're a woman, man to man, you know what that means. Let's not get all fucking ridiculous about it. I have no respect, because you wouldn't even stand up for your own when it came to the vax mandate. And I know this happened in several other states, but my state put out a mandate that all state patrol officers had to be vaccinated. A couple hundred obviously refused. And I really don't care where you stand on vaccines. It doesn't matter. I think that at least initially, the first 2 rounds are a good idea for most people. I cannot get behind force, though. And police have spent a long time trying to convince us that they respect constitutional rights and all of that, and simply do what they have to enforce the law, and then can't even stand up for the constitutional rights of your peers. That's fucking weak. That's, I'm not gonna keep hammering it. Sorry about Enzo barking in the background there. But I hope that if you are a police officer that happens to be listening to this show, you truly consider that point. Maybe that doesn't apply to you because you're not a Washington State Patrol officer and you never were put in that situation, but just consider the ramifications of that. How can I expect you to respect my rights and stand between me and tyrants if you can't even protect your fellow officers? Fuck the union. Fuck the government. Your oath is to the people. You are part of the people, to be clear. That's part of the problem, is this whole idea of separating police from the people. You are the people that you swore to protect. Anyway, moving on. Rather than contribute to even more infighting amongst Americans, we've got plenty of that going on. Let's talk shit about some Europeans, shall we? Alright. So I caught this post the other day. And I don't remember who it's by, so it's kind of irrelevant. But it was basically the Swiss government bragging about one of their social programs. And, okay, I gotta stop you real quick and make a quick note. I will clarify here later in the episode, but I am saying Swiss over and over and over. It's actually Sweden that wants to join NATO. So I will talk about Swiss a little bit, because I confused the two in my head. So just be aware of that. When I'm talking about the merits of Switzerland, I am actually talking about Switzerland, but the country that actually wants to join NATO is Sweden, and I will clarify that later on, but I wanted to make that note real quick, and I'll go ahead and let you continue. Boy, it just really, really gets me. So let's get into that. Spend another 44 minutes bitching about nothing, shall we? They're bragging about this social program, okay? At the time that they're begging to get into NATO. Now, mind you, the Swiss in particular, and I'm not just going to focus on the Swiss here, but that's what this article is about, so that's why I'm starting off that way. But, mind you, for the last 80 years or whatever, since the end of World War II, and during World War II for that matter, the Swiss have bragged about their neutrality during World War II, and that they don't need to be a part of NATO and yada yada, right? So they've not been a part of NATO for the last 80 years. They've also simultaneously been talking shit overall, that's the overall sentiment, about it this whole time. And now, the first time a threat comes knocking, look who wants to get into NATO all of a sudden. Haven't contributed shit for the last 80 years. Not a penny, not a fucking troop. Nothing. For the last... What is it? It's got to be 80 years, right? Yeah, 70, 80 years. I guess closer to 70. And now you want to take advantage of everything that us and the rest of the NATO alliance have built, and only start contributing now that there's an immediate threat. And something tells me as soon as that immediate threat is dealt with, one way or another, oh shit, we don't need NATO anymore. I mean, honestly, the smugness of fucking bragging about being neutral in World War II, when all of your neighbors, your supposed allies, were being decimated by the Nazis. And because you guys were safe, you sat back and didn't do shit. In fact, you helped move money for the Nazis through your beautiful Swiss banks, which, of course, Americans use too. But we're also allies, to be fair. But I'm digressing again. The point is, I don't know that bragging that you didn't do shit to help your friends because you were safe and you were fine is necessarily a good look. And now that you're not safe and you're not fine because modern technology has evolved to the point that the fact that you're surrounded by mountains isn't good enough to save you anymore. Oh shit, look who all of a sudden wants help. From the same people they've been ridiculing to some degree or another. And again, you know, obviously not every Swiss person has done this, nor have they done it every day of the week or whatever. That's just the overall sentiment of what they have said, you know, at different points in time from World War II till now. I like the Swiss. I think that, I mean, there's so many Swiss things that are awesome. I think that, you know, the Swiss make excellent submarines, surprisingly non-nuclear ones. They're the only submarines to have ever gotten a supposed hit on a modern U.S. I think it was a modern U.S. ship. Maybe it was a modern U.S. submarine, but I don't think so. I don't think it was a submarine. I think it was a modern U.S. ship. And they also have a really cool fighter jet that's, I really like the principle of. It's almost very American in principle. Now, not American military industrial, because that's entirely different, but American at heart in the sense that what makes it so good is that it's really well built, but cheap in price, and is easily repaired. It doesn't require fucking 4 years of engineering school to learn how to repair it, which allows it to be repaired, you know, in the bush. And that's a very American spirit ingenuity. there's lots of things about Swiss culture. Swiss are also a very armed populace like we are. There are a little bit of differences because they are still European to a degree. But honestly, out of most of the European countries, the Swiss are some that I relate with the most. That I, if I had to move to a European country, Switzerland would probably be it. So I want to be clear. Some of this, it's kind of in jest, but at the same time, when we get down to brass tacks, it's almost our obligation to tell you to fuck off. And ultimately we won't, because in a sense, it's kind of like your little brother. And I only say little brother because you're a much smaller country, not because you're lesser than. But it's kind of like your little brother where they really fucked up and you really shouldn't help them, but at the same time, they're family, so you're going to. That's basically how I feel about it, but I gotta bitch about this a little bit more. And I'm gonna stop picking on the Swiss specifically because the other European countries don't get the same, they're not gonna get the same positive talking points that I just gave the Swiss. Here's the deal. Europeans from just about any European country, and obviously, okay, it's really dumb that I have to give a disclaimer, and hopefully I don't to my general listeners, but I still am going to anyway. I'm obviously not talking about every single individual, and I'm not talking about every single European country. I'm talking about, in general, Europeans, primarily from the UK, Finland, Norway, Switzerland, right? Ireland, France, Spain, Italy, Germany, not especially, but Germany. That's for the most part it. There are a few other EU nations in there, but those primary places are the countries where this sort of sentiment reigns supreme. Less so Spain, just because they don't have their shit together currently, or for the last, a while, but they tend to have this same general smugness of how much superior they feel because, they have all these social programs and we have healthcare and universal college and yada, yada, yada. Okay, and I'm going to talk, it looks like it won't be in this episode, but the next episode, how I feel about some of those programs and stuff. Obviously, you know where I stand from more or less a policy standpoint, but from a philosophical standpoint, I haven't really talked about before. So I will get to that. And don't get me wrong, Americans have their own, smugness about other things. However, let me give you some reasons why it's more tolerable for us. And I know that's easy to say as an American, but back to the point I was making. I just want to clarify. I know I'm going to make some general statements here, but just get over it. Here's the deal. Most of you would look like Spain financially if it wasn't for the United States covering for everything else you're failing to do. Plain and simple. Maybe I shouldn't have said plain and simple, because obviously it's not simple. But when it comes down to it, the U.S. finances, and it's not just Europe, we do it with other allies as well, right? There's more to the globe than just America and Europe. I get that. I'm just focusing on America and Europe right now, so shut up. America, we're basically the baby daddy of Europe. All of it, damn near. Damn near all of it. Particularly the UK. I know we're supposed to have some kindred spirits with the United Kingdom because we came from the United Kingdom technically originally. We kicked your guys' ass the hell out of here for a reason. And while I do have some empathy, because you've been a ruled people, and this goes for other parts of Europe as well. You've been a ruled people for so long that I don't think most of them can comprehend the idea of freedom. And I understand most of you live fairly free lives. Directly comparable to us in the United States, most of you live pretty freely. Your quality of life is fairly comparable to that of us in the United States. However, let's talk about the UK specifically for a second, because I'm not as familiar with the specific healthcare systems of everywhere else, though I know that it's still not as good as the United States. But the UK specifically, it's great that you pay for your healthcare through your taxes instead of out of pocket. I wouldn't fucking pray somebody having to use your healthcare system on my worst enemy. The idea that a panel of politicians, essentially, bureaucrats, it's not politicians, it's bureaucrats, a panel of bureaucrats gets to decide whether or not your surgery or your procedure is worthy of happening, is in itself a good enough reason to abolish your system. Never mind the fact that it's financially unsustainable, just like our Social Security, but in an entirely different way. We could sustain Social Security if we wanted to. It's a whole different issue than United Kingdom's healthcare, as well as, like I said, some of these other countries. But you literally cannot sustain it. It will take up your entire GDP in a fairly short amount of time from now, reasonably speaking. The only reason it's somewhat affordable right now is because America foots the bill for so much of what you guys do. And that goes for most of Europe. And yes, I'm going to start off talking about NATO. 4.5% of our GDP. Every other person in NATO, other than, it might be Switzerland. I don't know, maybe it was Sweden, not Switzerland. I think pays just over 2%. The agreement is 4%. All NATO allies are supposed to pay 4%. We pay a little bit over 4%. It was somewhere between 4.2, 4.5. Other than one other country, which is either Switzerland or Sweden, y'all put in less than 2% this entire time. So let's compound that over 80 fucking years or however long your country's been in. Okay? Or if you're Switzerland or Finland, is it Switzerland or Sweden that's trying to get in right now? It's Sweden. God damn it. I know, I'm a fucking dumbass American and I always get those two mixed up. So most of the things that I said about Switzerland apply to Switzerland, but it's Sweden that wants in, and I don't really have much redeemable qualities to say about Sweden. But anyway, back to the point I was making. You compound that by all these years, or if you're talking about Sweden or Finland, paying basically nothing at all this entire time and then wanting to reap the benefits of everything that NATO has created till now. And I'm not saying that they don't have anything to contribute. I think that from a strategic standpoint, it's not a bad idea. But let's not forget, I know I got real quick, because it's going to drive me nuts. I know I got confused a little bit earlier with Switzerland and Sweden. Sweden and Finland were also neutral during World War II. They also, and neutral is really a stretch. If anything, they helped the Germans in order to remain neutral, basically. They did help the Soviets a little bit too, but neither of which were really our allies. Yes, the Soviets and us worked together to take down the Germans, but we immediately were enemies after that. We were never really allies. We just had a mutual goal. So they basically just provided aid to the enemy as far as the modern world is concerned, and then have claimed moral superiority to some degree since. And you know, haven't contributed anything to NATO and the modern defense. So, when you combine all that, and we combine the general attitude about just superiority in their European ways, it's just fucking, it's almost laughable, but it's really annoying, because the last time I checked, nobody came calling on Spain or France or Sweden or the UK or Germany or anywhere else. All of them and everybody else comes to America for help. Obviously, besides our enemies, pretty much China, Russia, North Korea. But it goes a lot further than that. It's not here's the deal. Really. Well, obviously, allying with Europe, and I'm not against allying with Europe or anything like that. It's not what I'm saying. I will clarify what I'm saying here at the end. But while there is little, a tiny bit of benefit to us being allied with Europe, this is a very one-way partnership. There's no fucking European bombers and naval ships protecting the coastline of America. And let's keep in mind that Russia, the greatest threat right now, is just as close to America on the west coast as it is Europe on the east coast. Did I do that right? Yeah. we're strategy-wise, we are every bit as much in danger, never mind missiles. There are no English missile batteries protecting the skies of America or English fighter jets, and I'm not saying that there wouldn't necessarily be if we went into an all-out war. That's not what I'm saying. But there is American jets, American missiles, American bombs, American dollars, American ships in every single European country providing for their defense. In both actual dollar amount, which obviously is pretty obvious because, we far exceed the European Union as a whole in GDP, but in actual dollar amounts and in percentages, we have contributed far more to the defense of Europe than any European nation has. Everything that Europeans have, to some degree, is owed to the American taxpayer. And I know that fucking stings to have to admit. If you're European, I wouldn't want to have to say it. And I don't expect anyone to say it out loud. But you have to know that it's true. Without the dollars you receive and the security you receive from America and the American taxpayer, your way of life would be noticeably reduced. Now, it wouldn't be terrible. I'm not saying that Europe would be all third world countries. Maybe some of them, Greece. But your way of life would be considerably and noticeably reduced. Aside from the fact that the whole idea of social programs, just because you pay for your social programs and taxes and we pay for it out of pocket doesn't make it, I mean, it's inarguably a worse system to begin with, but you're paying for it the same either way. So the whole argument is really just kind of ignorant, because one way or another it's getting paid for, and unquestionably it's the United States that even modern healthcare came from the United States. And yes, there are individual discoveries, certain medicines, not the majority, but there are certain medicines that came from this country or that country, or this discovery came from here, that discovery came from here. But modern healthcare was not only created in the United States, but possible by the United States and by the capitalist system. That's why every doctor's office has x-ray machines now. It's why getting an MRI doesn't cost $30,000. It's why the techniques and the education levels and the tools down to the most minor, scalpel blade is available to the most basic of doctor's offices. The same thing is true about schools. Don't believe me? Well, let's look at it this way. How many Americans are flooding to the University of Amsterdam? Or what do you guys call it? Is it, just university, right? Or the University of Glasgow, right? Or Berlin, or Zurich. There is one school that Americans will occasionally go to, and only if you're specifically going for the specialties of that school. And it's actually two, and less so one, but still, it's two. University of Oxford and University of Cambridge in the UK. And it's still very, very, very rare. People from all over the world come to attend American colleges. And again, just because you pay through it, the taxes that you pay to government, and we pay for it out of pocket, doesn't mean any different. You're still paying for it the rest of your life, just as American citizens can pay for it the rest of their lives. However, that's really a choice. First of all, you can go to college here for free or very, very cheap, and you can get an education that will get you in anywhere you want to go. With the exception of being a lawyer or a doctor, the prestigiousness matters none. As well as, even in lawyer and doctor, for 99.9% of things, the prestigiousness matters none. And if you're going into one of those professions, it's going to pay for your loans really quickly. Now, I'm not saying there's not problems with it. There's plenty of problems with it. But I'm just making the point. You can pay for it in your taxes the rest of your life, or you can pay for your loans as quickly or as slowly as you like. Some people make minimum payments and pay for it the rest of their life and complain all the time. However, that's also a choice. If they paid the same amount you paid in taxes to their student loans, they would ultimately pay a lot less. But regardless, there's a reason people come from around the world to go to American schools. And although people from third world countries and stuff might come to European schools because it's more accessible to them than getting to America, they would still, I can almost guarantee you, almost in any case, desire to go to an American school if possible. For the last 100 years, we have led the world in just about everything. And again, I'm not saying that there's not great things from other countries. That's not what I'm saying. I'm specifically making a point on the smug egotisticalness of Europeans. That's all. That's really the only point here. But the other thing is this, okay? And this comes from having freedom, first of all. And that's a really big conversation, and that's something I'm going to cover more. It was going to be at the end of this episode, but like I said, now it's going to be the next one. That's a big deal. But let's look at this. The American populace, private citizens, beyond what our government does, beyond our tax dollars, just to, what are they called? Nonprofits and NGOs and direct assistance. The United States public not only donates more overseas, so we donate more to other countries privately than any other country. We donate more than any other country's government, and we donate more than any other country's citizens, any other country's government, and our own government combined every year. That is something that only America can say. Obviously, a lot of that money goes to Europe. Most Americans would be pretty shocked at how much money went to European countries in the, 3 or 4 COVID stimulus packages than went to American citizens. And that's just, those packages. There's plenty more. And that's outside of defense. That's separate from defense dollars. But I honestly, I think that the biggest thing there is the private donation thing. Americans, our GDP is far and above any other country in the world. Next closest is China, which has a GDP of about half of ours, but they have about 4 times the citizens. So realistically, their GDP would have to be about 4 times ours in order to be equal. And I frankly don't think it's going to happen, but that's a whole nother conversation. And I know it sounds ludicrous because they're just on this beautiful skyrocket, but the other thing they're on the beautiful skyrocket of is tyranny, and tyranny always collapses. Anyway, back to the point. I think that that says the most, but, and I understand that a lot of the European people, that the way they are is different, or the way that they feel or what they would desire is different than what their government does. Sweden, let's say Sweden takes $100 billion from the U.S. on a fairly often basis, which is probably a somewhat reasonable number. Not necessarily yearly, but whatever. Anyway, I understand that the people might not have wanted to take those dollars, might not needed to, whatever. But your government did. So I would tone down the smugness until you put an end to that. Here's the last point I want to make. And again, I'm using this idea of European smugness towards America because it's kind of annoying, and I just have never had the opportunity to say my piece on that. But I'm using that to make a broader point, again, that's going to come, probably in the next episode at this point. I know I've said that like 3 times now, but I feel a little weird hammering this. It's not that I feel the need to hammer this home so hard. It's that I'm trying to get to bigger points here. But the last thing here is that despite the flaws of America, and certainly we have plenty of flaws, certainly despite the stains on our history, we have done certain things that the American people never would have done. It was really corrupt politicians outside of our will. However, we still have to take responsibility for that. Like I was just saying, I'm not trying to shed that, but when we look at history comparatively, America is the most powerful nation to ever exist. But we are not the first country to be the most powerful nation. When other countries have held power, we need to look at that a little bit. So, considering history, the blemishes on America's record are incredibly minor. compared to when your nation, if you happen to be a European listening to this, likely held power. There's been a point in history when Germany held global power. There's been a point when the UK did. There's been a point when France, I don't know if they ever held global power, but they held a hell of a lot more power than they have now. There was a point when Spain was a global superpower, right? You know, the EU is kind of a superpower now, but it's not, individually, none of the countries really are. Italy held a lot more power than they do now, you know, all of these sorts of things, right? And that's not true for every European nation, but several of them. And particularly the ones that I'm taking to task here the most. I know I was kind of picking on Sweden a lot, but that really just had to do with the fact that they were the ones wanting to join NATO, and they did have some marks in history, particularly regarding World War II. But as far as the general stereotype European that I'm thinking about that enjoys this sense of smugness, it's generally British people or French or Spanish or German, Italian not quite as much. Don't really have it from Polish people so much. It's not huge. Well, it is kind of big from Sweden, Finland, Norway, right? Switzerland. But many of these countries held power at a point in time. So let's look at Britain, since they were basically the last to hold the most international power. And what did they do with that? They conquered as many lands as possible. Same with Spain, France to a degree, same with Germany, right? And I'm sure to some degree, Finland, Sweden, I'm not quite as familiar with their histories. You know, when they had the opportunities, they did as well to some degree. And then obviously, you know, non-European countries have had their dark histories. But let's look at the UK and Spain in particular, because those would be the two largest, right? That we're talking about. The Spanish, they didn't do too much colonizing, but they sure did a lot of conquesting and just stealing and bringing shit back to Spain, half of which is at the bottom of the ocean, so it was pointless. Whereas England, on the other hand, did a lot of colonizing. They were, you know, they tried to expand the English Empire as far and as wide as possible. It's interesting how they backed off it so much. But anyway, the point is, when you were the ones that held the power, you weren't anywhere near benevolent. And I'm not saying America's benevolent, but I am saying that throughout history, we have probably done the best, the fairest at holding so much power. Okay? We've made mistakes. We've done bad things in, you know, very small, limited roles, right? But we didn't invade China and steal everything and bring it back home. We didn't do it to Russia. We didn't do it to South America. The fact that fucking Canada and Mexico exist is testament to that. There's like 30 million people in Canada. None of them are armed. Well, few. Almost none as of this year. But, and no military at all to speak of. Again, you're welcome. Canadians love to talk about their healthcare too, which is shit. Yeah, it's government paid for, which means taxpayer paid for. You're still fucking paying for it, like I said, but your healthcare is shit. And the only reason you have it is because you spend about $1.50 on security because you're neighbors with the United States. You know how many countries would have tried to take Canada by now because it would have been so goddamn easy to do? You have absolutely zero military might, and there's less people than there are in Ukraine. Post-Russian invasion, actually. Same with Mexico. Absolutely no military might. none. Does Mexico have a ship? I don't. Yes, they do. Okay. I know it's no time at all for you, but I took a quick break real quick to compare these two things. Surprisingly, Mexico's actually got a bigger navy, at least specific number-wise, than Canada. Mexico actually has more, just about everything. Far, far, far more troops. The biggest problem is Canada, obviously, being essentially our closest ally because they are our physically closest ally, gets a lot of America's modern shit, because Mexico has their own internal security problems. We obviously don't trust them with nuclear codes. Anyway, if Canada also spends far more than Mexico, something like $24 billion to $6 billion. So despite Canada's military force being significantly smaller, in almost every metric, the only, like, their navies, Canada has 4 submarines and Mexico has none. Mexico has more ships altogether, but in modern warfare, lack of submarines is a big deal, right? Canada would probably win in a head-to-head with Mexico, but with the way Mexico's been progressing, I don't think it's going to be that way for that long. Anyway, the point of all this, sorry, that was just kind of interesting side note, because I'd never really looked before, but the fact that either one exists, obviously neither hold a candle to the United States. Mexico's got so much corruption, we could just move in there and take it, and sure, there'd be a little resistance from some people, but many of them are trying to get to America anyway. I'm sure they would welcome America, Mexico becoming an American state, basically. It could only be upside for the citizens of Mexico, but none of that's the point. Completely irrelevant. Point being, the fact that either of them are sovereign nations are evidence of America's rule, our reasonable rule, let's say. It's not benevolent. It's probably the closest thing, again, when you look at ruling powers in history, but it's certainly not benevolent. There's no question about that, but it's got to be the fairest rule in history. I can almost guarantee. I mean, maybe there's, some other small example of somebody that had power for 3 days or whatever, but certainly when we're talking about superpowers of history, standing, lasting superpowers of history, I don't think there's been a fairer one. We could reasonably take Mexico, all of Central America, and most, if not the entire continent of South America with little effort. Obviously doing it incrementally. If we tried to do it all at once, it would be a disaster. But we could probably do it all at once. It would just be much harder battle, obviously. But the fact that they exist, the fact that after World War II, we had taken Germany, we had taken France, we had pretty much destroyed Italy and could have taken it. Most of the European nations were pretty well crumbled. Poland, we could have taken it if we wanted to. And I know, Polish people or the German people, or not German people, but even the UK was so crumbled that we probably could have taken it if we wanted to put pressure on them. And like I said, I know, Polish people are like, well, we wouldn't let you out of the country. Well, it's in 2022, vision's a little bit different than it was in 1944, when you're in, every city is leveled and you have no economy to speak of, and famine and just total destruction. If we wanted to put leverage on anybody, most of Europe we could have just taken. We didn't. We helped rebuild it. And yeah, it mutually benefited us. But we didn't demand anything in return either. I mean, sure, we had our agreements from the end of the war that had benefits for us, but we didn't, we didn't come back and tell Europe they needed to loan us $1 trillion because we bailed them out, And same goes, Japan. We completely crumbled Japan. Last I checked, it's still under Japanese power. Well, it was under British for a little while. I'm not really sure why we gave it to the British after I don't know. I never fully understood that. Nonetheless, it is ultimately under Japanese power again. But, China 50 years ago, we reasonably could have done something about. There's just, a lot of people like to point to things like Vietnam and North Korea and things like that where America failed. But we failed in Vietnam and North Korea, particularly for two reasons. One, because we didn't commit correctly. Vietnam was just like Afghanistan. It was a long engagement where we didn't do militarily anything correctly. World War II, we had the right mentality because it was, it wasn't really life or death for Americans. I mean, it kind of felt like it after Pearl Harbor a little bit, but even still, the shores of America likely would have been fine. We might have taken some attacks or something, but it wouldn't have been considerable. In order to attack America, there's no superpowers besides America on our continents. There's no superpower in South America. There's no superpower in North America besides America, the United States. So, any superpower that wants to attack us, they have to mobilize their entire military to do so. It's not like Germany, who was able to just attack everybody to their left, right, up, and down. It would have to be entirely an air and sea war. So, ultimately, we were pretty safe then, and we're pretty safe now. And because Vietnam, we didn't feel like we should be there. And same goes for, Korea's a little different, but same goes for Afghanistan. And we were we basically moved in and tried to be a police force where we weren't wanted. We didn't go fight a war. And when I say that, I'm not trying to minimize by any means any American soldier that went over there and fought in the war. I'm not saying it wasn't a war. I'm just talking strategy-wise. I don't think there's any doubt in any American's mind or any analyst's mind that if we wanted to decimate Vietnam, we could have decimated Vietnam. The fact is that wasn't what we were trying to do. We were trying to do this half-assed in-between maneuver. Same with Afghanistan and Iran. And that it was never going to work. It never would work. And it still hasn't worked. Korea was a little bit different, and Korea wasn't necessarily a total failure either. The fact that South Korea is a thriving nation today exemplifies that. That's in large part due to America and the fact that we're still there as well. But, or at least the threat of us reappearing is still there. The point is, even in those failures, we were trying to handle them in a better way than we should have. Ultimately, we ended up causing more harm, likely, by trying to do that. But it was the American people restricting their government, overstepping their bounds, that caused that. and it was unintentional that it ended up being worse because of it, but there's no doubt that if America gets behind something, we will accomplish it. We've proven that time and time and time again in history. Nonetheless, America's time of power has been a time where, we have literally lifted the entire world up a level. The quality of life in the entire world has raised considerably under America's power, which really came in, post-World War II. Ultimately, we have reigned in a much more cooperation mindset than any other power before us, which was either rob and steal everything or conquer as many places as possible. That was true, in China, in Britain, in Spain, in France, in anywhere else that ever had rule. India, whether it be over the regions that mattered at the time or the entire world. America has unquestionably done the best for the world in having the top spot. Especially considering the fact that, our power is far greater than, say Britain in its heyday or whatever. Our GDP up until recently was damn near bigger than the entire world. The EU now is relatively close to the United States. It's still, considerably less, but it's not half or a quarter. China's is half now, and again, that's in large part due to the United States. If it wasn't for America spending all of our manufacturing dollars over there, I know a lot of people would like to say, well, China would still be fine, blah, blah, blah. I don't think so. And not because it can't be. I think that with freedom, the Chinese nation would be an incredible place to be. But communism holds them back, and it's the influence of America that has allowed them to excel to some degree and maintain for some period of time. But ultimately, communism will destroy that country as it destroyed it before, as it's destroyed several others. Just as communist fascism, whatever you want to call it, is in Russia. Russia's always been very Marxist communist, but it's also a degree of fascism at this point because Putin rules top down. I don't know. At this point, I'm starting to really wander in my thoughts because I want to get to this other stuff, but we've already gone for the whole time. So I know I really kind of went off there without summarizing well, but the general point is the American people help support the entire world, not necessarily all at once, but at one point or another, we've helped support the entire world. We spend incredible amounts of money, give incredible amounts of time and effort and material goods to places in need and to our allies. Like I said, there's no British tanks and Navy ships and jets protecting the shores of America. No French ones, no Canadian ones even, no the 6 of them that they have or whatever. I think they have 26 boats altogether. There's no Spanish ships, right? But none of that. But there are American troops and equipment protecting all of Europe. In conjunction with them. Again, it's all about cooperation. And the American people agree with cooperation. Like I said, we could take over Canada or Mexico tomorrow. But we'd much rather help Mexico. I'm going to put Canada aside because we've already basically done this. But with Mexico, we'd rather help Mexico rise up, which we have been, and be a stronger country and a very strong ally. And hopefully see Mexican citizens be guaranteed the rights and freedoms that Americans have. And I really hope that once we get our current bickering squared away and our current I'm going to end up going here anyway. And our current our current issues politically squared away, and we get somebody who cares about America again back in the office. And I'm not saying that it's, it got to be a Republican to do that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that there's never been a Democrat that cares about America in office. All I'm saying is that right now, the politicians in power, some of them Democrats, some of them Republican, but the ones that have been there for a long time, including the president, don't give a shit about America or its people. They only care about their agenda and their power. So I really hope that once we get that squared away and we hopefully get back to the principles and stuff that have made us America, well, all we need to agree on is the Constitution. As long as we can agree on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, then everything else is easy. I'm fine with disagreeing with everything else my government does, so long as those things are respected. It's pretty simple. I'll still disagree with it. I'll still vote against it, or I'll still, lobby for fiscal conservativeness and all of that good stuff. But as long as the Constitution is respected, I won't be, what's the right word? I won't be in fear of what the future brings in my country, like I am right now. But anyway, I know I've said this 3 times now, but once we get that stuff taken care of, because that's a conversation for the next episode. Once that stuff is secured, then I hope that we do start moving south and helping lift these countries up for our own benefit as well as theirs. While I believe in nationalism to a degree, I certainly don't think there's anything evil about nationalism. I do think that at a certain point, nationalism can start to inhibit the growth of humanity altogether. We need to work cooperatively with everybody. I don't think the nationalism that we have between America and Europe, for example, is inhibiting our abilities between the two. I think that Europe is inhibiting its own abilities by not having the constitutional guarantees for its people that we have, and that's a conversation for another time. But I don't think that, aside from that, I don't think that our relationship inhibits our ability to move forward together at all, just because we're different nations, right? It's only when it's nationalism of enemies, China, America, two opposing belief systems that, it's really one opposing belief system that doesn't allow for the other. We could care less if China exists, and we could care less if they get more powerful. China, on the other hand, would destroy America the second it had the chance, and is undoubtedly trying to do so nonstop. I would like to see the CCP destroyed, the Chinese Communist Party destroyed, for the benefit of the Chinese people, because they have no rights or freedoms. But without the CCP, I have no concern over how strong China gets, because I know America will continue to grow too. And I don't care if one grows faster than the other. It doesn't matter to me. Like India, for example. India is growing rapidly. I'm 100% behind that. I still have my problems with Indian government as well. The problem is with government in general, but they're not opposed to anybody else existing, right? They're not actively seeking to destroy anybody else, as I truly believe America is not. Certainly the American population, which ultimately does control our government, even though there might be a lag in correcting certain mistakes, we have no interest in that. Anyway, I will continue with this thought, and where I'm leaving off will kind of make more sense by the next episode. Yeah. Hopefully you enjoyed the rant. Probably not, but hopefully you did. With that, JBU@USA.com. Send me an email. Topics for the show. Something you want to hear me discuss. If you want to discuss something with me. If there's somebody you want me to get on the show. Whatever it is. Send me an email. JBU@USA.com. Facebook.com/JBU. Anchor.fm/ oh shit. Facebook.com/JBU show. Anchor.fm/JBU. You can find all the links for Rumble and Twitter and all that good stuff there. With that, my name is Chris, and this has been Just Between Us.
Bye. Wait, I want to be a little bit louder.
Yeah.
This is only between us.
This is just between us.
This is just between us.